Hospital workers of Reddit, what was the dumbest thing you saw a patient do immediately after leaving? When I was a nursing student I did a rotation on a transitional care unit in my first year of SCHOOL where people go to wait for a nursing home placement. Had an older man as a client who did not have any cognitive impairment complain about abrasions on his penis. Okay, all is well, and I call for a doctor to look at it to get some antibiotic ointment for it. The doctor can't come up to our floor for another few hours. I tell the patient this and leave to go do something else. About half an hour later it's time to go take his blood sugar, and guess what I find the man doing? Jerking off in plain sight and his hand and penis are bloody and raw. I literally had to have a conversation with a man my grandfather's age and have to tell him not to masturbate while the abrasions are healing and to take it easier once it was healed. I work in medical imaging where patients have to drink oral contrast for their exam. Some folks really hate the stuff, and one patient after being given the oral contrast went outside and dumped it in the bushes and came back in and said that they had drank it. Our front desk lady actually saw her dump it in the bushes and told us about it, but we would have seen the lack of contrast in the image even if she hadn't told us. I talked to the patient and was like, we can see inside of you. We can tell if you drank it or not. What did she think it was for? A refreshment? No. Some patients think that parts of procedures are arbitrary and they can just decide for themselves and it won't matter. I perform another exam where the patients have to be fasting for 6 hours before their exam. The exam looks at the metabolism of sugar in the body and the patients cannot eat any sugar within the 6 hours prior or it'll ruin the test. I cannot count how many times prior to the exam I asked a patient and was told that they hadn't eaten or drank anything but water since last night, but the images don't lie, and when the exam is ruined, the patients usually fess up and say things like, I just ate some candy. I didn't think it would matter, or what did you expect for me to do? I was hungry, or I didn't eat anything. I just drank a soda. That shouldn't count at 6 hours, people. You can go 6 hours without sugar. They inevitably have to come back for a rescan, and they're usually angry at us for it, like it's my fault that they didn't follow the very detailed prep that we give them. I work for a medical device company that makes bone screws. We had a patient sue us for faulty implants. Apparently his screws broke less than a month after surgery. This is a big deal. And not just from a financial standpoint, so of course we launched a full investigation. Turns out the Dumbus decided to play tackle football less than a month after his major back surgery. Our bone screws are strong. But not tackle football strong. This case was thrown out. Discharged a patient after hysterectomy, removing uterus, stitches atop of vagina, and she went home and had sex. Busting her stitches and allowing for her bowel to protrude through the vagina. Had to have an emergency procedure to fix it. Not after leaving, but this older gentleman had his wife bring him in and out the literal day after his open heart surgery. I couldn't believe it. Edit. Oh, and for clarity. The surgery was a heart bypass for clogged arteries. I used to be a live sound engineer for a living. I was working at this one venue, and this band had their own sound engineer. I still had to do everything as far as micing up the stage and wiring everything, because he said he is supposed to take it easy after his bypass surgery. He even showed my the scar. Not that I asked or questioned him. Anyway, after I do the entire sound check for him, he flags down a server and orders 4 shots of tequila and an order of cheese curds. Server laughed thinking he was joking. And he is just like, no, I'm serious. And plug in a mic cause of his heart surgery by deep fried cheese and tequila is fine apparently. He got so drunk he could barely walk. His son drove him home. Now retired, but one of the things I liked about my hospital was the food. We have a lot of immigrants in our area, and some wise person decided to hire a pretty diverse crowd of cooks: Jamaican ladies making spicy chicken, Japanese cooks making sushi, Mexican dudes making made-to-order burritos, local barbecue, etc. And it was all very clean from a nutritional viewpoint. All of it was inspected by our RDs. And just about every day I would see patients turn down this excellent food and have their families bring them crap from fast food joints in town. Edit. Well. This caught fire while I was asleep. Yes. The food was good. The barbecue vendor also offered fried chicken. But the reason I retired a year early is because that hospital was being absorbed into a large healthcare corporation, and we all know that never benefits anyone but the suits. From what my former coworkers tell me, that cafeteria now offers the finest food service meals delivered daily in refrigerator trucks and served fresh from the microwave. Hiring cooks who wanted a job is probably not part of the corporate profit plan. Being in a hospital is strange and fast food is familiar. You had me at jerk chicken though. That's the thing, if you're at a hospital you're probably stressed, and when you're stressed you don't want to be trying new things. You want something familiar and comforting. And yeah. For a lot of people that's probably going to be fast food. Yes, if you're in an area with a lot of different diasporas burritos. Jerk meat. And udon noodles, I somewhat doubt sushi was on the menu, are going to go down well because that's the comfort food of the people you're treating. Hell, I love trying new stuff, but if I was in the hospital I wouldn't want any of that stuff. I would probably just want a nice Vegemite sandwich because it's familiar. I feel like I am that person. When I was 15 I broke my arm. Went to the hospital, got a cast, went about for a few weeks and got it removed. Great. I have my arm back. Now I wasn't the brightest kid and needed everything explained to me. No one told me not to have an arm wrestle with my fresh out of cast arm. No one explained it was still healing. 4 hours after having my cast removed I was back in A&E and getting a new x-ray and then a new cast put on by the same nurse who just took it off. I have never seen such disappointment in the eyes of someone who wasn't my mother. Countless COPD asthmatics coming in for wheezing, SOB. Rapid breathing. We treat them, and the second they feel better they will state, "I forgot something in my car." Only to leave and light up a cig. Somebody lit up a cigarette in a no-smoking area with a nasal cannula on and lit their face on fire. Had to come right back into the ER. I was discharged from our emergency room and wanted a cab voucher to get downtown. We wouldn't give him one because he didn't meet our requirements. He walked outside, called 911, and told the ambulance to take him to a hospital downtown. In the Darwin Awards is a tale of a man in hospital with a skin problem. The staff coated him all over with a cream which is highly flammable. Warned him about it and told him to keep away from any sources of ignition. He immediately snuck outside for a smoke. Went up like a Roman candle. Got hit by a fourth car. Not a doctor, but I knew someone that is a fitness freak to an obnoxious level. She had a medical emergency, intestinal blockage, one day that involved major abdominal surgery and removal of part of her intestine. The day she was released from the hospital, she went back to her insane workout routine, trying to make up for the muscle she lost. She claims her doctor told her she could. Her intestines ripped open. She barely survived. She still claimed after the fact that her working out had absolutely nothing to do with her body ripping open and it was just bad luck. We had a guy leave AMA against medical advisory and then get hit by a bus. Inject heroin into their PICC line, big IV, leave to go smoke a cigarette and get hit by car, steal from a 7-Eleven while in a hospital gown, escape from the ER and steal an ambulance. Patient came in for shortness of breath. She was seen and discharged. The nurse saw her walk into the parking lot, dab herself in the leg with an EpiPen, and come right back and saying that she's short of breath. My brother works as a volunteer for the Red Cross. He mostly volunteers as a medic in ambulances. He told me how they picked up a guy because he crashed his bike after he didn't pay attention and got his tire stuck in some tram tracks. About 3 hours later he was picked up again after he tried to ride his bike with one hand in a cast. First time round he sprained his elbow. Second time round he broke his shoulder on the same side. I don't work at a hospital, but off the top of my head, one, the patient who refused to get in an ambulance when he was having a heart attack until we let him have a cigarette. 2, the patient who while having a stroke insisted he was fine and was just going to go home and nap, we got his niece to come and bring him to the ED. 3, the patient who insisted he knew his body and was able to frighten his paralyzed limbs into working correctly, and that was why he did not need an ambulance to go to the hospital for the stroke he was currently having. His limbs were paralyzed because of his first severe stroke. This was his second. 4, the parents who when their infant had trouble breathing gave him a lot of milk to drink and laid him down. Kid was fine, but these people were clueless. I have way more can you believe the patient did that stories, but these were the ones I saw myself. As requested, more crazy patient stories. 1, the IV drug user who refused free vaccines cause they didn't want unsafe substances in their body. 2, the addict who wanted to know the safest way to use cocaine because their dealer kept mixing cocaine with heroin. We told this patient there is not a medically recommended safe way to use cocaine. This person just decided to switch dealers. 3, the person who knowingly let, and I do not use the word let lightly, her child be sexually abused, complained that we made their child sick and were not providing sufficient care for their child's recurring nightmares and depression. 4, the patient who had tumor grow to the size of a watermelon before they sought treatment. This person is actually doing really well now and last I checked expected to make full recovery. 5, the mother who was convinced her kid had hearing issues. Kid's hearing worked just fine, they just ignored their mom. 6, the patient convinced they had memory loss. They didn't. They did have 4 kids under 5 and a newborn though. 7, the patient who was frustrated that his 7-year-old was obese and not losing weight despite the fact he kept buying her junk food. 8, the patient convinced we were going to hurt him during specific minor surgical procedure needed to diagnose his health problems and just screamed that at us at different visits. We have never forced him to get that procedure, nor do we provide it on site. 9. The patient, who was very poor with no real assets, who refused to speak about DNRs and her will while I was in the room, the only patient who has ever refused to speak in front of me. I think she thought I was trying to steal from her IDCIM just basic staff. 10. The patient who called me cute. He was completely blind in one eye. The deity is the only patient that has ever called me cute. I am aggressively average looking person. I just find this story funny. Not hospital worker. But my grandfather's wife tried to sneak KFC into the hospital for him immediately after triple bypass surgery. I am in it and was working an overnight shift in the emergency room supporting a new software rollout. The dude was brought in because he had drunkenly stumbled out in front of a car and got hit. When my shift ended around 11 a.m. I went to a little Irish pub down the street to have a beer and some lunch before I headed home to get some sleep, and lo and behold, guys, who is in there drinking again. Yep, same dude from the was already drinking whiskey again just hours after being released from the hospital with a broken arm and a few other injuries. Had a guy in his 20s come in with a TBI from a car accident. Decided to discharge against medical advice. Showed up the very next day after attempting to back out of his driveway and slammed into his girlfriend's car. The problem with head injuries is you aren't rational. I had a bike accident at camp and I'm pretty sure had a concussion, crash. White flash. And I woke up on the ground in a position that suggested I went over the handlebars. The front wheel was bent almost in half. I was first aid and CPR trained and I knew not to move someone who had that kind of injury. But I insisted I was fine, so they let me up. You couldn't really stop the guy. But head trauma makes for poor choices. I work in a COVID clinic and I had a patient come in who was just a ball of anxiety about all sorts of things, but mainly COVID. He had no symptoms either, just general anxiety. Anyway. He walked out of the clinic. Immediately took off his mask and went into the Jimmy John's across the street. Seriously? You come to specifically talk about your fears of COVID and then you take off your mask before going into a store? Why? On my OB rotation in med school. We had a 32-week pregnant woman with cardiomyopathy, heart failure-like condition, and an ejection fraction of 15%, bad. She's inpatient until delivery and everyone's worried she will die during or after delivery. One night the unit clerk calls and asks the nurse on duty, "Have you all seen Ms. X tonight?" The nurse says. "She's in her room, I assume." The clerk then says, "Well, that's weird because I'm looking at her eating a funnel cake at the state fair right now. The patient just decided she needed a break from all of this hospital life." Okay, this was me. I had finished a sleep study, as to which I barely slept and had to redo it. I was 6 a.m. and I was leaving the hospital. I walked into a glass wall. Which was clearly a wall. It even had the visibility stickers on it, twice. Twice I bounced off the same wall in my attempt to leave the hospital. The dentist had to put a little boy, maybe 3, under general anesthesia to treat his bad teeth. Everything went fine until he was about to leave and I saw his mom getting him Gatorade. Turns out it was his favorite drink and it was almost all he was drinking. The parents thought it was a fruit juice and that it was okay for him to drink. No wonder he had so much problems with his teeth. Poor little guy. I once fostered an adolescent boy who came with very bad teeth too. His bio mom gave all her children nothing but soda to drink. One day we both had to meet at the clinic for a supervised visit and she had her youngest 1-year-old daughter with her. As we waited in the lobby, I wasn't allowed to speak to her. But I could clearly see and hear what she was doing. The little girl was getting fussy. So bio mom says, "Do you want some juice? Want some juice? Honey?" Then she reached into the baby bag for an empty bottle, opened it, then took out a can of Drive. €2 per and poured her child an adult-sized serving of caffeine and sugar. Patient obese enough to be in a wheelchair. Went outside for a smoke. Cigarette in one hand. Inhaler in the other. One puff of the cigarette. One puff of the inhaler.